What if you were offered a magical job? A job that not only paid you 3 times the average wage, but also made you, quite literally, glow in the dark. What if this job made you feel special, like an angel, covered in stardust? Now, what if that magic was actually a deadly poison, slowly and agonizingly killing you from the inside out? And worst of all, what if your bosses knew it and watched you die? This is the true tragic story of the Radium Girls, the young women of the 1920s whose lives, dreams, and bones were stolen by the very company they trusted. This is not just the story of a workplace accident. This is the story of one of the most cold-blooded, calculated corporate betrayals in American history. Our heroes are not one person. They are the hundreds of young working-class women who got jobs at the U.S. Radium Corporation factory in Orange, New Jersey. Molly Maggia, Grace Fryer, Quinta McDonald, Albina Laris. These were the names. They were the flapper generation of the 1920s. They were full of life, full of dreams, and eager for freedom. And when they landed that job at the radium factory, they believed they had won the lottery. Their job was simple: painting the numbers on watch dials. The paint was not ordinary paint. This was Undark, a revolutionary new substance that used the newly discovered wonder element, radium. It glowed in the dark, forever. This job was glamorous. This job was high status. They were paid 3 times what any other factory girl earned. They were known, in the town, as the Glowing Girls. The antagonist was not one man. It was the system itself. It was the face of corporate greed, an entity that valued profit far above human life. The beginning of the story is filled with innocence and magic. World War I had just ended. Radium was the magic word of the decade. People were drinking radium-infused water as a health tonic. They put it in face creams. They believed it cured cancer and gave endless energy. The girls in the factory were told that this glowing powder was completely harmless. Their job required delicate precision. To paint the tiny numbers on the watch dials, the tips of their camel hair brushes had to be perfectly sharp, like a needle. And so, the supervisors taught them the technique: lip pointing. The company bosses instructed the girls to dip the brush into the glowing radium powder paste, then put the brush between their lips, using their tongue and lips to twirl it into that perfect fine point, and then paint. Every single time, for every single number. Dip, lip, paint. Hundreds of times a day, these young women were swallowing pure, weapons-grade radium. Before we continue this story of unbelievable corporate betrayal, if you love real-life stories of justice and the fight against corruption, hit that subscribe button right now for Living the Stories. At first, this was part of the fun. The girls would play with the paint. They would paint their fingernails, their teeth, and smile in the dark. When the workday was over, they would glow in the factory darkness like ghosts. When they went home, their hair, their clothes, and their very skin would still shimmer with that ethereal, magical green light. They would go to the dance halls at night, and the Radium Girls were the center of all attention, glowing on the dance floor. They were angels. They were special. And every single day, they were swallowing their own death. Because the managers, the chemists, and the company owners, they knew the truth. The male scientists, who handled the pure radium at the same factory, wore heavy lead aprons. They used metal tongs. They never, ever touched the substance. They knew it was deadly. But they told the girls the paint was safe enough to eat. Because the girls were just factory workers. They were expendable. And then the dream ended. The magic turned into a nightmare. The first to die was Molly Maggia. It started, innocently enough, as a toothache. She went to the dentist. The dentist, assuming it was a simple infection, pulled the tooth. But the wound did not heal. Instead, it got worse. It spread. The hole where the tooth had been refused to close, becoming a festering, weeping sore. Molly's entire jaw began to ache. She went back to the dentist. The dentist, thinking another tooth was the problem, reached into her mouth and gently gripped the next tooth. And Molly's entire jawbone, the entire section of her jaw, broke off in the dentist's hand. This was radium jaw. The bone marrow had been completely destroyed from the inside, eaten alive by radiation. The bone itself had become porous, brittle, and dead. It was crumbling like a dry cracker. The doctors were terrified. They had never seen anything like this. And then, another dial painter got sick. Then another, and another. This was not a coincidence. This was a plague, confined only to the girls working in that factory. When the girls started dying, what did the company, US Radium, do? Did they tell the truth? No. The cover-up began. The company launched an expensive, vicious smear campaign to blame the victims. They lied to the doctors. They lied to the press. And in the most cruel betrayal of all, they started a rumor that the girls were not dying from radium. They were dying from syphilis. They claimed these young women were immoral, that their rotting bones were the result of a sexually transmitted disease, the ultimate shame of the era. They didn't just poison them, they destroyed their honor as they were dying. But the company did not count on one thing. Grace Fryer, she too was dying. Her spine was collapsing, but she was determined to fight. The fight seemed impossible. Grace tried to find a lawyer. This was the wall. No lawyer in New Jersey would take the case. US Radium was too powerful. It was a massive corporation with military contracts. They owned the town. They owned the doctors. The company doctors who examined the girls published reports stating the girls were perfectly healthy, just hysterical. And the clock was ticking. This was the true pressure. The law, the statute of limitations, stated that the victims only had 2 years from the first sign of injury to file a lawsuit. Molly was already dead. Grace's 2 years was almost up. Her spine was collapsing, and her time was running out. She was dying, and the company was simply waiting for her and the lawsuit to die with her. After being rejected by dozens of lawyers, they found one, a young, idealistic attorney named Raymond Barry, who finally agreed to take the case for no money, pro bono. Now, the legal battle began. But Grace and Barry knew they needed proof. They were fighting ghosts. The company insisted they had no idea. Radium was dangerous. This was the great lie. We now know, from historical records, that the founder of the company, Arthur Roeder, was terrified. He knew he had commissioned a secret, internal report that proved the girls were radioactive, that the lip pointing was killing them. When he received that internal report, he ordered every copy destroyed. He ordered the scientists to lie, and he told the court the accusations were baseless. This was the conspiracy. Grace's team needed their own expert. They found one, a scientist from Harvard who agreed to test the women. The results were horrifying. The scientist put Grace Fryer in a dark room. Her bones, her very bones, were glowing. They were glowing through her skin. He tested her breath. She was exhaling radioactive radon gas. The radium had fused with their skeletal structure, replacing the calcium. Their skeletons were now radioactive power plants, cooking their own bodies from the inside out. The physical trauma was medieval. Their bones would shatter just from walking. Their spines collapsed under their own weight. They suffered horrific anemia as their marrow died. Tumors grew on their bodies. But now they had the proof. The case finally went to trial. This was the climax. By the time the trial started, the girls were dying. They were so sick, they could not even sit upright. They had to be carried into the courtroom by their families. They were so weak, they could not raise their right hands to take the oath. The judge had to allow them to testify from the stretchers they lay on. The company lawyers immediately used their darkest tactic: contempt. They attacked the morality of the women. They reintroduced the syphilis lie, trying to shame them. And then they used their main weapon: delay. They filed motion after motion. They asked for endless continuances. They knew the girls were dying. They weren't just fighting the lawsuit, they were waiting for the plaintiffs to die before a verdict could be reached. It was a race against time. But the media finally turned. The journalists, who had previously ignored the story, now saw the drama: the skeletal dying women being carried into the bright courthouse, facing the wealthy, arrogant corporate lawyers. They were no longer factory girls. The press gave them their immortal name: the Radium Girls. The public opinion shifted violently against the company. The judge, seeing the dying women before him, refused any more delays. He forced a settlement. This was the deathbed victory. The company was forced to pay. The women won. They received $10,000 each, a fortune at the time, and full coverage for all their medical bills. But it was too late for them. They were too sick to spend the money. Grace Fryer, Molly Magia, all the main fighters, they all died within 2 years of the settlement. They were poisoned, betrayed, and slandered, and they died. So why is this a story of victory? Because their fight, their sacrifice, was the legacy. The story of the Radium Girls exploded across America. Their lawsuit, their suffering, and their courage directly led to the United States government enacting the first laws protecting workers. Their tragedy created the foundation for modern labor laws, workplace safety regulations, and eventually, the creation of OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. These women, who were told their lives were worthless, whose honor was stolen by the company they trusted, changed the world. This brings us to the analysis. This isn't just a sad story from the 1920s. This is the definition of corporate betrayal. This was not an accident. This was a choice. The company knew radium was poison. The scientists, the men, were protected by lead. The girls, the expendable workers, were not. The company chose profit over human life. They chose to lie. They chose to slander dying women to protect their stock price. This is the contempt that defines our darkest dramas. My personal take is the terrifying irony of the glow. The very thing that made them feel special, magical, and angelic was the radioactive poison killing them. They went to their dances, glowing in the dark, looking like stars, while their bones were literally dissolving. It sits the ultimate metaphor for a false promise. They were sold a dream, paid to swallow light, and it was a death sentence. But the final victory belongs to them. The next time you walk into a workplace in America and assume the conditions are safe, that is only because the Radium Girls, who couldn't even stand up in the courtroom, fought for that right. They died so that workers decades later could be safe. So what do you think? Was this just the cost of progress? Or was this a deliberate, calculated act of mass murder for profit? And do you believe the executives who knew the radium was poison and still ordered the lip point technique were any different than a man who puts poison in a bottle and hands it to a victim? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. These women did not just paint dials. They painted the future of workers' rights with their own bones.